Bubba Wallace crossed the finish line at Atlanta in second place, 3 wide at nearly 200 miles an hour on the final lap of a race that had already been dragged through a 3-hour storm delay and didn't finish until nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. A brilliant, gutsy run to the front. And then NASCAR looked at the replay, applied their rule book, and scored him 29th. Not 3rd, not 10th, 29th. The very tail end of the lead lap. A 27-position swing decided after the checkered flag had already flown. Now, most of the coverage you're going to see about this is pure outrage. Bubba got robbed. End of story. Click here. But that's not what we do here. Because when you actually look at what happened, and more importantly, when you listen to the very specific, very technical argument Bubba Wallace himself made afterward, this becomes something far more interesting than a simple injustice. He isn't just complaining. He's making a precise claim about what the rule actually says, and whether NASCAR applied it correctly. So today, let's break down exactly what happened on that final lap, what the yellow line rule really means, the exact argument Wallace is making in his own defense, and the honest case on both sides. Stay with me. Welcome back to Freedom Line News, the channel where we don't just chase the drama, we break down what really happened. If you're new, hit subscribe. This community is growing every week. Let's get into it. Let's set the scene properly. This was the Quaker State 400 at Echo Park Speedway in Atlanta, and by the time the finish arrived, everybody involved was exhausted. Lightning had forced a red flag on lap 109. Cars were covered. Drivers were pulled out of their machines entirely, and the field sat there for more than 3 hours before engines finally refired late into the night. The race went to overtime. It ended in the small hours of the morning. And on that final lap, the running order at the front was this. Ryan Blaney was leading, on his way to a dominant night in which he would lead 171 of the laps. Carson Hocevar was running second, and Bubba Wallace was third, right behind them, in the number 23 Toyota. Now remember what kind of track this is. Since the 2022 reconfiguration, Atlanta races like a super speedway. Massive drafting packs, cars inches apart, and the finish almost always comes down to which lane gets organized first and who gets the right shove at exactly the right moment. Third place with 1 lap to go at a track like this is not a settled position. It is a launching pad. So here's what Wallace did. Coming to the finish, he dove to the inside of Carson Hocevar, and in doing so, his car dropped below the yellow line. That yellow line, painted along the very bottom of the racing surface, is a hard boundary at superspeedway-style tracks. It exists for one reason: safety. Because at these speeds, in these packs, if drivers are allowed to use the apron below the line as an extra passing lane, you create a scenario where cars come flying back up into heavy traffic at closing speeds that can genuinely kill people. So NASCAR's rule is simple in principle. You cannot go below that yellow line to advance your position. Wallace came back up above the line, and at the finish, he was 3 wide with Hocevar and Blaney. And when they flashed under the checkered flag, Bubba Wallace was scored second in real time. On television, in that moment, it looked like a heroic, career-defining charge at the very end of an exhausting night. And then NASCAR reviewed it, and they determined that he had advanced his position by going below the yellow line. The penalty for that is severe, and it is immediate. You get dropped to the back of the lead lap. Second place became 29th. Christopher Bell was elevated to second. Carson Hocevar was scored third, and Ryan Blaney kept his win, his second victory of the season. Now, here is the part that almost nobody is covering properly, and it's the entire reason this story is worth 10 minutes of your time. Because Bubba Wallace did not simply throw his hands up and say NASCAR hates him. He made a specific, technical, rulebook argument, and it deserves to be heard properly. His argument is this. He points out that the rule, as written, does not simply say you cannot go below the yellow line. It says you cannot go below the yellow line and gain a position by doing it. Those two things are different, and the distinction matters enormously. And Wallace insists he did not gain a position from the dive itself. He says he was actively on his brakes, deliberately trying not to advance while he was down there. He says that when he came back up above the line, he was still running third, exactly where he had been before. And then, only after he was back on the racing surface, Ty Gibbs gave him a push from behind, and that shove is what carried him from third to second. In his own words, technically, no positions were gained. Think carefully about what he's claiming there. He's saying the position change happened after the infraction was already over, and that it was caused by somebody else's front bumper, not by his own trip below the line. If that's genuinely true, then under the plain wording of the rule, he did not gain a position below the yellow line, and the penalty shouldn't apply at all. So who's right? Let's be genuinely honest here because this is far more finely balanced than either the outrage merchants or the NASCAR defenders want to admit. The case for Wallace is straightforward. The rule contains two conditions, below the line and gained a position. If he can demonstrate he was still third at the moment he came back up, then the second condition arguably wasn't met when the infraction actually occurred. And there's a fairness argument sitting underneath it too. Going from second to 29th is one of the harshest possible outcomes anywhere in this sport. That is not a slap on the wrist. That is the complete annihilation of a result at the end of a brutal, storm-delayed night. If the call is even slightly debatable, is that really the punishment it deserves? But now the case for NASCAR, and it is stronger than the outrage crowd will ever tell you. Because officials aren't just looking at a single frozen frame. They are looking at the whole sequence as one continuous move. And the argument goes like this. The dive below the line is what got Wallace alongside Hocevar in the first place. It is what put him in position to receive that shove from Gibbs. Without going below the line, he simply is not there, in that lane, at that instant, to be pushed forward. So even if the precise moment of the pass happened above the line, the advantage that made the pass possible was gained below it. And that is exactly the loophole the rule exists to close. Otherwise, every driver at every superspeedway would simply dip below the line, set themselves up, pop back above it, and then claim the position was won perfectly legally. And that is the real, honest heart of this whole controversy. This isn't a case of NASCAR being biased or incompetent, and it isn't a case of Bubba Wallace whining. It's a genuine collision between the literal wording of a rule and the obvious purpose behind it. Wallace is arguing the letter. NASCAR is enforcing the spirit. Both of those are entirely legitimate positions to hold. And that is a far more interesting conversation than he got robbed. And this rule has been a lightning rod at superspeedway tracks for years. Drivers have argued about its wording and how consistently it gets enforced for a long time. Atlanta made the argument impossible to ignore. So what does this actually cost him? Quite a lot, as it turns out. Bubba Wallace now sits 13th in the championship standings, 298 points behind the series leader. And here's the detail that gives this whole thing a genuinely strange flavor. The man leading those standings, the man Wallace is now nearly 300 points behind, is Denny Hamlin, who happens to be the co-owner of 23XI Racing, which is Bubba Wallace's own race team. His own boss is beating him by nearly 300 points, and now a penalty has just stripped away one of his best results of the entire season. And the timing could hardly be worse. The regular season is running out of races. The chase is coming. A second-place finish at Atlanta would have been an enormous momentum boost for a driver who badly needs exactly that. Instead, he leaves Georgia with a 29th place finish, a significant points hit, and a rules argument he is probably going to be having for weeks. Whether NASCAR eventually revisits how this particular rule is worded is a genuinely open question, because Wallace has, whether you happen to agree with him or not, exposed a real and meaningful ambiguity in it. And in a sport where races are increasingly decided by inches, and by a well-timed shove in a 200-mile-an-hour pack, the gap between the letter of a rule and the spirit of a rule is only going to keep mattering more. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think NASCAR got this one right? That the whole move was a single, continuous, illegal advantage? Or is Bubba Wallace correct that the rule, as it is actually written, means he did nothing wrong because the pass itself happened above the line? And is dropping a driver from second all the way to 29th a fair punishment for a call this debatable? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to Freedom Line News, where we cover every NASCAR story with the detail it actually deserves. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.